The views and opinions of the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the management and staff of Guardian Radio.
Good morning and welcome to Guardian Radio AM. Today is finally Monday, July 6th. It's a little after 11 o'clock in the morning. Once again, this is C.A. Newry and I shall be your host for the day. We continue in our series, our march towards the Bahamas independence celebration, right? But last week, Friday, we started a conversation about our connectivity to the United States as the United States celebrate 250 years of independence. And I wanted to see the connectivity of the Bahamas in terms of how we impacted the United States, how the United States impacted us. Nuggets, historical nuggets that usually some Bahamians just don't know. Nuggets that we in the Bahamas should be taken advantage of in terms of telling our story, retelling our story to the Americans and say, hey, we are globally significant, we are culturally significant and is important to you. Today, I actually, when I did the show on Friday, I was bombarded with phone calls, bombarded with texts and emails saying, how come you didn't bring a historian on to reinforce, to go into detail of some of the things I was saying? They appreciate what I was saying, but they wanted more, right? So I said, okay, I will reach out to the resident Guardian Radio historian, right? Can you imagine? We have a resident Guardian Radio historian that we call now and say, come on the show, right? All of the Guardian personalities and slots. They said, let's call Christopher Davis to come in and speak on certain topics. And I said, let me reach out to Chris. Because, he's busy all the way in Clifton there. They have doing some big things. The premier heritage spot right now in the Bahamas. So I said, let me see what his schedule is. And if I'm lucky, I can try and bring him on early enough on Monday as we march towards the Bahamas celebration of independence, our heritage, our cultural expression, and stuff like that. But without further ado, let me welcome Mr. Christopher Davis.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good. And usually I would let Christopher go into his African narrative of Ghana and what the hell you are now?
Nana John Kwao II.
All of that,
That's
right?
That's what you asked just now. You said
yes,
yeah,
the title what he has. But I'm going to skip that. But I wanted him to say it still. But I'm going to skip that.
Or John Canoe II.
John Canoe II. Yeah. Because we should already know about his book, Black Rinse, right? Yeah. In the bookstores. And already know the narrative of what's inside the book. I'm going to be using some of that narrative to tell this story, our relationship between, the Bahamas relationship between the United States and the Bahamas.
Right.
So I'm going to start now. I'm just going to jump into it. Ready?
Certainly.
So we're going to start, Mr. Davis, with 1492.
Yeah.
The Bahamas was rediscovered by the Europeans.
Yeah.
Because apparently they had some connectivity and they forgot. They just forget.
Yeah. Well, I actually argue that the Lucayans was the ones who discovered Columbus and his fleet.
Yes.
If I drive it in my car and I come to your corner and I lost, and you look out your window, and you see I've been lost driving around, you give me a little bit of water and you point me in the right direction and you help me out, I would say you're the one who discovered me.
Yes.
Right?
Now, who were the Lucayans? And now we have a narrative of the Lucayans where they come from, but there's two separate narratives of who the Lucayans could be.
Right, yeah. Now, as we understand it, and particularly at the Clifton Heritage Authority, using the sentiments of the experts in this area like Dr. Grace Turner and, of course, Dr. Michael Pateman, the Lucayan people were people who arrived in the Bahamas. The date is difficult to pinpoint, but some new archaeology has actually made the date a lot longer, saying that it's probably around 1,300 years, but I think anywhere between 1,300 and 800 years ago. So even in the sort of human family tree, the Bahamas is one of the last places to have humans arriving in any capacity, right? Now, generally, it's thought that they were the ones, they migrated through the Caribbean from South America, right? But some of them, as we understand it, also came from the Yucatan side, that part of Mexico that sticks out in the Caribbean Sea. And we know this because of a shared culture that they have, which is the flattening of the foreheads, for example, which you don't see much throughout the Caribbean, but you see it in the amongst the Yucatan, right? But these Lucayan people were peaceful people, though they did have their own warrior class, right? They were people who were seafarers. They were people who gave us a lot more than we care to acknowledge, as a matter of fact, right? So when we look at words that we use now in common English vernacular, and there are even more Spanish words that were borrowed from their Arawak language. So we also often hear them called the Arawaks, which is not incorrect, but it's a very broad term. It's more like a linguistic term. So saying Arawak would almost be like saying the English-speaking Caribbean, which is not wrong, but it's very, and then you got to get down to, so the Lucayans were a sort of cultural group untowards themselves who are most closely related to the Taino of the Greater Antilles. So we're talking about Jamaica, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican, and what is now Haiti, Dominican Republic, and what is now Haiti, right? Another thing that we got from them, they sort of gave to the world, is barbecuing, right? So the word barbecue actually also comes from their language, right? Hurricane as well. And when you look at these people, we can't just view them as just a blip in history, particularly us as Bahamians today. These were people with a rich culture that traded as far as areas in Central America. These were people that gave things like cassava to the world, things like potatoes. All indigenous cultures sort of contributed this to the world. So even when you look at West Africa, one of the most common dishes, staples throughout, is fufu, which is made from cassava. But cassava is not indigenous to West Africa. You understand what I'm saying? When you look at potatoes in Europe, Europeans struggled to feed themselves for millennia until potatoes arrived.
The Great Famine in Ireland.
Exactly, and so we know all the way in Poland, Russia, all of them have these closely linked histories that involve the potato, right? And they are sort of, their whole existence almost at some point depended on the potato that came from here. And these things were being cultivated by the Lucayans. They had domesticated dogs. They had their own religion. They believed that God was a woman that was in a cave that gave birth, just to give you an idea that these people were an actual group of people to be respected, revered, and of course, remembered.
So let's now move on to 100 years, 200 years, 1492, we're going to 1652 thereabouts.
I see your history because you're just jumping right to the right periods,
We're talking about the Bahamas connectivity to the United States.
Right.
The Bahamas was known as the Bahamas and Virginia something another by the Lord Proprietors.
Yeah.
If you know the correct name, you can tell me whatever.
Yeah, it was just pretty much the Bahama Islands. So another thing, I remember even when I was in school, we were taught that Bahamas was a Spanish word. But Bahama is another one of those sort of terms that was taken from their language as we understand it now. And Grand Bahama was actually the island that they called Bahama. And then you had the Great Bahama Strait, Little Bahama Strait, and then that's why the T in our country is a capital, because it's actually plural. It's the Bahamas, right? Now, skipping over to the period that you're talking about, this is where we actually do start to get linked with them through this Lord proprietorship. We were more so linked with the Carolinas, more so. And then, you had Bermuda up there as well. But from that period, even before the Lutheran adventurers arrived, who I just prefer to call Puritan migrants from Bermuda, I don't like to perpetuate some of these colloquialisms attached to these stories that seek to sort of whitewash and sugarcoat them, right? Because out of the 78 or so that came, about 20-something or so were enslaved Africans.
And people forget that Africans came with the Lutheran adventurers.
Exactly, and that's never a part of the story. And it was that few Africans laborers, as I heard you talk about on your show several times, and the link between the Bahamas and Harvard. So this link starts even before the Loyalists. That's where much of the focus is. Most of the migration happened, as we know, and more of the more significant migration, which kind of gave birth to all of our ancestors and how we are here today now. But this relationship with the United States began all the way in the mid-1600s, and you could see it with the wood that was taken from here and then sold and used by the people that built the first buildings of Harvard College, which of course is now Harvard University. And then also, interestingly, during that period, the Bahamas became a place. So the so-called adventurers, when they came, they were mandated to only settle in the north. Shout out to Dr. Grace Turner, and she explained this to me years ago when we were just having random discussions, as we typically did when I was at AMMC. And she was just explaining to me that, it was because they were already getting salt from the southern Bahamas. And so that's why they were
So they were
mandated.
always here.
Right, they was already here, but just in periods. So they would bring people and bring enslaved people to rake salt from the southern Bahamas. So we talking about from Auckland, go straight down. There was no permanent settlements or anything like that. I'm not too familiar with the archaeology surrounding, but we certainly do know that it happened. And another thing that happened, particularly coming from Bermuda and a little bit from Virginia, the Bahamas, particularly Eleuthera and New Providence, became a place where they would export undesirable Negroes, quote unquote, from other colonies.
So just reiterating, because we're going to move to the time period. Besides the 20 slaves that came with the Lutheran adventurers, right? 70 Negroes were expelled out of Bermuda and sent to the Bahamas also.
In 1656, if my memory serves me correctly, right. And so the Bahamas became this place where they would send these sort of disorderly things. And for me, when I look at it, because, you know, we getting into this proverbial age of piracy now, right? It's starting to form now. You get all these super, super corrupt Lord proprietors. I can tell you, I smile because, of course, the African diaspora, let's put it that way. We ain't pointing at any one country or another, but we all have problems with this sort of mindset of corruption amongst leaders and within countries or whatever, and that's deeply rooted in slavery and colonization, in my opinion. But when we compare the corruption of these fellas to the things that was going on with these Lord proprietors and royal governors who we are taught to praise, it's no comparison, and they were far more corrupt. I talking about you importing everything, you own every shop, you own the port, you importing everything. Everybody who come to live there got to pay a tax that pretty much goes directly into your pocket, and you're getting an exorbitant salary, though oftentimes it was late. You're still getting your big exorbitant salary. So it worked almost like, in a way, like feudal England. You understand? You had the lords, and everyone was pretty much subservient to these lords.
So the United States have a narrative of pirates. And in the narrative of pirates, we share the same names that are called. They call Captain Maynard, who killed Blackbeard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I want to have a brief narrative of who made up the pirates living inside the Bahamas in terms of ethnic grouping, right? Mm-hmm. And how did that impact the Carolinas and Virginia? And again, our conversations, how the Bahamas impacts the United States as we celebrate both our independence.
So, you had a lot of pirates, and remember at the time, the United States was a British colony. Right, so when you talk about the British Empire, the British at the time, you are also talking about the Europeans that are colonizing the United States, though the French and the Dutch were there in the beginning as well, right? However, when you look at this relationship with piracy, again, it's always focused on the Eurocentric side, and furthermore, it's usually taken from the colonial side. And so pirates are often just, particularly from that era, late 1600s into the early 1700s, they're all sort of portrayed, for the most part, as criminals, right? You do see it glorified and stuff like that in Hollywood, but it's not really, in my opinion, properly contextualized from a historical standpoint. And many of these pirates were black, so it's actually a little joke.
We had black pirates in the Bahamas?
Oh, yeah, big time. It's actually a little joke that I like to crack. Because I have a problem with one of the questions. I don't know if it's still there. I know it's about to be moved with her, but there's a question in the PGCSE curriculum speaking about this era. And the question essentially, to paraphrase it, is saying, imagine that you're a settler in the Bahamas in like 1719 or whenever, and it's describe how Woodes Rogers' arrival positively impacted your life. And I was like, man, I would rephrase this question, because most of us, 95% of us, are of African descent, though at varying degrees. And I would actually say, well, the question really should be, would you rather be a pirate or a slave? And I think every right-thinking person would say pirate, right? And at the time, the Bahamas' economy, unlike other British colonies at the time, and not to perpetuate this slavery being easy in the Bahamas narrative, but the reality is at the time, the Bahamas' economy was not slave-based. Yes, you had some salt raking going on, and of course some timber cutting going on, as we already discussed, but it was not the sole basis of this economy. And as a matter of fact, when you look at people like Blackbeard, for example, who was stationed right here on New Providence for much of his pirate career, right? And in the Bahamas in general, it was said that at one point, 6 of the 8 of his quartermasters, so his main generals, were people of African descent, right? One of those is one of the best-known Caribbean black pirates by the name of Black Caesar, of course. And you have a key in the Berry Islands called Caesar Key, and a key in the Florida Keys called Caesar Key, both of which are said to have been named after Black Caesar. Okay? And then you have those who are sort of in the middle, and this is where the complexities of race that still exude themselves today. You get the quote-unquote conky joke, which essentially means the person of African descent who is white enough, right? And so this brings people like Reed Elding or Red Elding, right, who was a mulatto, but he was a very light-skinned mulatto. He was a pirate as well. He actually served as governor, and he was a big-time pirate. They accused him of being so corrupt, and of course, most of the stuff was mostly true. It's unclear if he was actually born in the Bahamas or in Barbados, but he definitely made the Bahamas his home. And he ended up even becoming a politician later on because he was one of those people that signed the pardon by Woodes Rogers. But ironically, before we became a colony, Red Elding was able to rise to be the leader of New Providence at one point. And when it's about to happen again, when we was a British colony, you know what they tell him? No, with your black self. All right, then. So,
And is this at Red Elding, Reed Elding?
that's the Eldons.
Eldon family?
Eldons, yes,
so
that's
they
the
come from that
Eldons.
pirate, come
Yes.
straight down the Eldon
Yeah,
family.
right.
They've been here a long time.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, I've talked about this history, and again, we have to remember that these pirates were not inherently evil. As a matter of fact, not to paint them with one broad brush, to say that they were these great and fair people, because you have people like John Every, who was just as savage a slave trader and a racist as any colonial official, right? But generally speaking, people of African descent, you could even argue women, fared better in some of these pirate crews. But it's always displayed as like these debaucherous places with brothels and bars all over the place, and everyone just singing tunes and fighting each other and killing each other over a whim, when there's actually a lot of honor sort of behind it, particularly when you look at it from the perspective of an African, or I'd even argue a woman.
Let's move to 1776, the American War of Independence. How did the Bahamas impact the United
Okay.
States? How did the United States impact the Bahamas?
So even leading up to that, there was a lot of movement in the intra-American slave trade. So we had hundreds coming from, particularly Charleston, South Carolina. There was some coming from New York, other parts of the Caribbean as well, right? Now, with the American independence, it's so funny. Let me choose my words wisely, but I don't know if someone would call it a sort of form of arrogance, because America is very unique in this way. They count their independence from when they declare it, and not from when they actually want it.
Okay.
So, and what's interesting too, this is where we have showed a complex relationship. So, you know, most of it will be a positive influence at the Bahamas and a positive relationship, particularly when you look at it from the African perspective between the Bahamas and America historically. But in this case, a lot of people don't know that the first place that the United States actually raided, their first naval military expedition,
I mentioned that. Go ahead.
was the raid of Nassau.
Yes.
And this actually happened before the Declaration of Independence in March 1776. And they sent about 200 Marines here because they had some gunpowder shortages, like a kill 2 or 3 birds with one stone type of operation. They had shortages in their artillery and gunpowder and stuff like that. So, and they heard that there was a lot here in Nassau, specifically Fort Montague. That is where this happened. And so they were able to raid that and incapacitate the British at one of their closer, places where they could attack from the south, as well as, getting and taking a lot of the stuff that was there.
So we have a connectivity history, but United States Marine activity in the
Right.
Bahamas. So we need to perhaps join in and take advantage of that long history of them being here.
And then the Spanish took over at one point and all that. Now, however, though, my main focus, as you know, in regards to our relationship with the American Revolution deals with the Saltwater Underground Railroad.
We ain't reached there yet.
Yeah. So I know if you.
No,
but,
we ain't reached there
yeah,
yet. Let's
okay
take
then.
this the war.
Okay, so the war. All right. Now, many people don't also realize this was a war on many fronts, right? And when you talk about the loyalists, again, this is another one of these sort of cute names that because the word loyal within itself is generally positive, right or wrong, right? So if I say you're a loyal person, I'm complimenting you. I love to say you're loyal to a fault for it to then be a negative trait, right? So again, but these British loyalists, why would it be that the majority of people in America feel like they suffering. And of course, I'm not ignoring the fact that they had about 500,000 enslaved Africans in the country at the time as well. And at the same time, it's this cruel irony where they beating their chest for freedom over taxes while also enslaving thousands and thousands of African people, right? So we got to point that out. But at the end of the day, why was it that these so-called loyalists, when everyone else was so oppressed, right? If 90% of the country feel one way and you in part of that 10% that feel a different way, you don't think something wrong there, right? And these were men like, to give an example, John Murray, a.k.a. Lord Dunmore, a.k.a. the governor of Virginia. He was one of the people that went toe-to-toe with George Washington, right? When we talk about here at Clifton, William Wiley, this was another man who rose to the rank of lieutenant general in the British Armed Forces, fought in the American Revolution. This is also even tied to the history of the Seminoles, right? Where the great king, Bolek. So this, remember I said this was a war on many fronts. The great king, Bolek. Let me see if anyone make the connection.
To Bolek.
Right then, right?
I want us going that. Oh, I was going to tell you get that caller, but I continue. Go ahead.
All right. He died in a battle, I believe it was somewhere in Georgia at the time in 1784, right? And most of the Bolegs are either from his clan or even directly descended or related to him.
Let's hash that out.
In the Bahamas.
So
right?
some Bolegs got the name because they are part of the clan, and then some may be direct descended from this Boleg.
Certainly. It was his family. So, and then you had different factions. That Boleg faction is actually not to pit one group of Africans or indigenous above the other, but boy, I can tell you, they were the ones that escaped the dreaded Trail of Tears, right?
So I want you to go in detail with that because I have so much other questions to ask you, right? I'm going to go to this caller, but I want to ask you this.
Yeah.
The sale of Florida, what is a black Seminole versus a Seminole? Because again, they're trying to connect us Bahamas to
be honest with you, they wanted the same.
Go ahead.
Right, because the word Seminole is not actually a tribe. Seminole means runaway in the Algonquin and Creek indigenous language. And Seminole became runaway because it was when the people we now call Americans started to come, people from Western Europe started to come, commit genocides, take over the land, implement chattel slavery. What do you think happened? The entire time, remember, there was resistance. And this resistance took the form in maroonage. And I got into this sort of research actually because of Dr. John Henry Clark. And I study that man, still do to this day, love him, and I think he's the greatest person that has ever lived. Just my opinion, right? But I would always like to challenge him. He said that every state that had slavery had maroon societies, and that is how the Seminoles sort of formed when Africans from all different groups, diverse groups of Africans, met up and linked with diverse groups of indigenous Americans, Algonquin Creek, mostly from that Georgia, Florida area. And then they became Seminoles. And of course, the black gene being sort of dominant. And now we have this phenotype and this word, this one-drop rule. If you're clearly of African descent, that means you're black. That means all of them is black Seminoles for the most part, right?
Let's go to engage this caller, and one more sentence with that, and then we move on to the next time period also. I'm excited now. Go ahead, caller. I'm trying to speak to Mr. Davis here, Christopher Davis, and we're running through the time periods on how we connect to the United States. Go ahead, caller.
Hey, gracious, you just here, and Mr. Davis, how you doing?
Good, brother. Thank you.
Really, man, boy, I love history. Boy, I love history to death. I really go dig up for some gold right now. I'm talking with it.
Go check Caesar Key.
Right? A.K.A. Black Bear.
Yeah.
What was myth and what is factual about this particular character? Because, you know, he used to have some burning stuff in his hair. Was that for fashion, or was he actually, like, being ridiculous doing that? Second thing, right? Second question, right?
Okay.
Was he actually a violent individual, or he actually was actually using that burning stuff in his hair for intimidation?
Right.
Now, my second question before I hang up, right? Go forward in time. Which part in the Bahamian history, right, we changed from aquamarine in the flag to navy blue? Because I don't get the navy blue thing in the flag yet.
Yeah. No, I see that. So you see that on some athletes.
That is not the Bahamian flag.
And stuff too. Yeah,
I see why people are not buying flags and not putting their cards, because it's simply not the Bahamian flag.
Yeah.
Okay. I appreciate it.
Well, a lot of people from outside the Bahamas are the ones making the flags. I get sure these flags being made in places like China and being sent over. And you might just have one manufacturer who might just think it's like ocean blue or something like that and not actually aquamarine. And that's a hard color to to get right, I assuming, right? But to the Blackbeard one, I appreciate you raising that. And the story of Blackbeard is one of the best things in contextualizing sort of what we was already alluding to in that age of piracy. There's actually no sound proof that Blackbeard ever killed a soul. Now, one could argue, if 1,000 people saying the same thing about you, it probably true to some degree. But in actuality, there's actually no proof of that. As I also mentioned, Blackbeard was one of the more, whether he was doing it out of shrewdness, whether he was doing it out of knowing that it would greatly benefit him financially, or whether he was doing it out of greater understanding for humanity than he's given credit for. But the truth is, plenty of his crew, some scholars suggest most of his crew, were people of African descent, the majority of whom were people who were taken from slave ships and things of that nature.
The Queen Anne's Revenge was a slave ship.
Exactly. The Queen Anne's Revenge was the Widow Galley. You see? And this was actually taken by a man named John Julian, who was a black mestizo from Honduras, who was in the Bahamas. You know where they take the ship after they took it to convert it from a slave ship to a pirate ship? Right here in the Bahamas. So when you talk about slavery, when you look at things from the African perspective and you talk about these pirates, yes, you have your Edward Lowes. Now, don't ask me what I know you want to ask me.
No, go ahead. Edward Lowe is what he's like a progenitor of the Lowe family. But go ahead.
But Edward Lowe, well, I don't know. They say Matthew Lowe, who was definitely a pirate. I don't know if there's any relation. But there was an Edward Lowe who was considered to be the worst and most brutal pirate of all time. But then you had a Blackbeard, you had a Calico Jack, you had a Anne Bonny, you had a Mary Read, you had a John Julian, you had a Black Bart, you had a Bellamy, the one that took the Widow Galley, and it shows you that they were not worse than these colonial masters who were slaughtering indigenous people and stealing them things. As God say, as I close on this age of piracy thing, when teeth from teeth, what God is doing.
God is smile.
Okay then.
So we're moving from 1776, we're into the 1800s, 1838. We have slavery has been, the slave has been emancipated, and now we have in these Underground Railroad, the Saltwater Railroad. Right. I want you to give a narrative of that. We're going to take a quick break as we celebrate the American independence, the Bahamas independence, how both countries influence each other, and I'm going over the history of our interconnectivity. We'll be right back.
I'm Ed Donahue with an AP News Minute. The Belgian Soccer Federation is demanding an explanation from FIFA after Team USA's Flo Balogun was allowed to play.
Seat, please. They'll call you in for your x-ray shortly.
That's why they call it a waiting room. You won't have that problem at 4th Terrace Diagnostic Center or Imaging at Grosvenor. We never schedule multiple appointments, so you'll be in and out in no time. And if your initial screening reveals a concern, our radiologist can conduct an alternative screening right then and there. Call 328-8157 to schedule an appointment at 4th Terrace Diagnostic Center or Imaging at Grosvenor today.
Girl, Junior just showed me Bella Boy on his phone.
What you mean? He take picture of that good-for-nothing boy?
Shh, you don't want Bella here. You say that. You know she always say that's my good child.
So what he doing in Junior phone?
Oh, he there because the police looking for him. He on their wanted list.
Wanted persons in your phone now?
Yes, child. And when police want to find anybody quick, after something happen, they can send pictures direct to your phone. Go to Google Play or App Store and search for Crack Crime Bahamas, then pick install, and it will go straight to your phone.
There is also a section on missing persons?
Yes, girl. Everybody needs to get this app so police can tell us right away when these people go missing. Just like an alert system.
Yes, it has numbers for Crime Stoppers Bahamas, so you can call and nobody knows it's you. Call direct to Miami and give the information without giving your name or anything about you. I tried the other day, and when I hear Junior and his boys talking about where they hide those guns, I walk quick round the corner and call that number.
Call 328-8477 from Nassau or 242-300-8477 from the Family Islands.
Headed to South Florida soon? Holiday Inn Express in Plantation welcomes you to the heartbeat of Florida fun. Whether it's business or pleasure, the Holiday Inn Express is close to sensational shopping, captivating dining, and nightlife. Elevate your Florida experience. Sleep well and rest easy at Holiday Inn Express. Complimentary breakfast buffet featuring seasonal favorites. Keep up your fitness routine in our 24-hour on-site fitness center with cardio equipment and free weights, or take a refreshing swim in our outdoor pool. Your special Bahamas tourist rate awaits. Holiday Inn Express, 1701 North University Drive, in Plantation. Book your getaway now. Call directly at 954-472-5600 or the sales department for reservations and additional information.
No budget for a vacation this summer? No worries. We got you. Guardian Radio 96.9 will fly you and a guest to South Florida for a vacation of a lifetime. Our sweet summer escape gets you round-trip tickets on Bahamas Air. $1,000 spending cash, thanks to Percy's Island Games. Brand new luggage from Brass and Leather. 4 days and 3 nights at the beautiful Holiday Inn Express Plantation. Free car rental from Hertz, too. All you need is your passport. We got you covered. Enter now for the Guardian Radio 96.9 Sweet Summer Escape. Fill out the form in today's Nassau Guardian and follow us on all social media platforms. Remember, you must be 18 or older to enter. Entry deadline August 12th, drawing August 14th. Taxes not included and certain restrictions apply.
Guess who's back?
It's that time again for the 31st annual Michael Scuderi Peace on the Streets Basketball Classic.
Bring it on now, let's go.
Whether you're a player or a fan, you don't want to miss this one. The action starts July 13th at the Hope Center. Log on to peaceonthestreets.com and register.
Come on, everybody, we're going!
That's the Peace on the Streets Basketball Classic, where we shoot hoops instead of guns.
Game time.
Love the show? Want to give your support? Become a sponsor today. Call 302-2300 for our rates and packages. That's 302-2300. Become a sponsor on Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
No budget for a vacation this summer? No worries. We got you. Guardian Radio 96.9 will fly you and a guest to South Florida for a vacation of a lifetime. Our sweet summer escape gets you round-trip tickets on Bahamas Air. $1,000 spending cash, thanks to Percy's Island Games. Brand new luggage from Brass and Leather. 4 days and 3 nights at the beautiful Holiday Inn Express Plantation. Free car rental from Hertz, too. All you need is your passport. We got you covered. Enter now for the Guardian Radio 96.9 Sweet Summer Escape. Fill out the form in today's Nassau Guardian and follow us on all social media platforms. Remember, you must be 18 or older to enter. Entry deadline August 12th, drawing August 14th. Taxes not included and certain restrictions apply.
We're gonna give you a check every week for a year. Percy's Pension Plan, Island Game, keep you winning. Percy's Pension Plan, dream big, we will help you live it. Percy's Pension Plan, Island Game, we got you. Percy's Pension Plan, from the friends you can trust. If winning is a must, come play the game you know, cause your best chance is with us. The most trustworthy name is Percy's Island Game. So put 20 on your account and ride this easy train at Percy's Island Game.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, streaming on GuardianTalkRadio.com and the Guardian Radio app, Nassau, Bahamas.
And welcome back to Guardian Radio AM. Of course, we celebrating the Bahamas independence, our march towards independence, and we are reflecting on how the Americans in general, the United States of America, impacted the Bahamas, and vice versa, how we impacted the United States. I just now confirming the second show tomorrow.
Yep,
because
tomorrow.
we're not going to be able to run through all of this time and dates. And I have so many texts ask me to ask Mr. Davis this and ask Mr. Davis that. And I said, but I have so much things to ask him now, right? But now it's 11:45. And you know that if it is 11:45, it's Percy's Island Game time, right? I wanted to say, attention all Island Game players. Percy's pension plan is now accepting applications. You hear that? Percy's pension plan is now accepting application. It's because if you deposit a mere $25, you are officially in the running for a weekly salary for up to $1,000 for the full year. You know it is to get $1,000 every week, 52 weeks, right? Application closes on September 8th. Apply now at theislandgame.com. right? To continue our conversation, I'm here with Mr. Chris Davis. We're moving to 1838. It's now the Africans inside the Bahamas are free.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
But the United States, they ain't free.
Yeah.
They still enslaved. They had mastered them.
Right.
How we impacted them, how they impacted us.
So even while slavery was going on here, I mentioned Lord Dunmore earlier. He also became the governor of the Bahamas, by the way. I pinpoint the beginning of the Saltwater Underground Railroad actually to November 1775. This was when the governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, the one who, John Murray, all the Murrays for the most part, either descended from him or were enslaved by him at some point, right? He did this proclamation that said, if you're indigenous American, if you're black, come and fight for the British and we'll give you your freedom. So even when those first migrations happened, you had a significant amount, I would say in the thousands of African Americans that sought to get freedom in the Bahamas by siding with the British in the American Revolution. Throughout that time, too, you had many runaway ads with people from the Carolinas and others. Of course, Sambo Scriven being the founder of Bethel Baptist Church.
Let's pause. And Sambo Scriven's American?
Yeah.
So that's my thing. Who is Sambo Scriven? Because the Scriven brag with him all the time.
Right. So Sambo Scriven was first enslaved by a man named James Scriven in Georgia, who died during the American Revolution. Sambo Scriven was a revolutionary black separatist pastor who was a part of the first ever black separatist church in the Americas, then known as Silver Bluff Baptist Church. He was also joined with people like Amos Williams. Amos Williams was from a tribe called Yamacraw.
Indian. And few Bahamians know that Yamacraw is an Indian word.
Right. That was actually very similar to Seminoles, but not as quote-unquote black or as African, but they were a mixture. And Amos Williams himself was a man who was of both indigenous American and African descent, and he identified as a Yamacraw. I'm still doing research to see if our Yamacraw is connected to them. I'm sure it is in some way, probably when a congregation split, who was from Yamacraw, which is also a village at the mouth of the Savannah River. Okay? So all this is Saltwater Underground Railroad business we talking.
So what is Saltwater Underground Railroad?
So the Underground Railroad was led by people like Harriet Tubman, right? And it was a system and a network of people that were helping in hideouts and different routes to get freedom in Canada, ending in places like Chatham, Ontario, Halifax, Nova Scotia. You had a very similar system that came here to the Bahamas, particularly during and after all of the confusion of the American Revolution. Now, the same Lord Dunmore had made the proclamation that kind of inadvertently opened up this so-called Saltwater Underground Railroad. He became the governor of the Bahamas and re-enslaved almost all of the so-called black loyalists that came over with them, right?
So hold on. We had black loyalists, free black men who came to the Bahamas, and you said someone
who served with the British in the American Revolution.
And they were re-enslaved?
Men and women too, actually. Women too. So the most famous one was Nancy Dixon. I wrote about her extensively in my book, and we also feature her at the Sacred Space exhibit. And I have another book that I can keep under wraps until it come out for now, but it's coming out soon. We have an entire chapter dedicated to Nancy Dixon, the woman who refused to be enslaved and the champion of the Saltwater Underground Railroad. Right? So yeah, you had black loyalists, but again, remember this term loyalists. These black loyalists were just like the quote-unquote black patriots. The patriots fought for the rebel American army, the black loyalists fought for the British, but all of them was fighting for the same thing, a promise of freedom. And the Americans tried to follow suit, and it was all one big lie. The Second Amendment is even actually connected to this, because after the American Revolution, remember this was a war on many fronts, you had indigenous American groups, African groups, people that ran away from plantations during all the confusion. And the Second Amendment was pretty much passed to firmly and reestablish and implement through violence white supremacy in America, right? Because it ain't like you can go to sleep one day and then wake up the next day and say that everyone should have the right to have a gun. It was so that they could sporadically do up militias to resist the resistance, to resist, you get what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. To resist their resistance. Yeah. You know, resist enslavement and resist indigenous American, appropriation of indigenous American land and the like. Yeah.
So I was going to ask about some examples of how we help with the saltwater Underground Railroad.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly,
So-
I've heard stories about Bahamians going on Biscayne Bay. If you have any stories like that.
Yes, yes.
And I see you caller. Prepare to call it
the
there.
Florida keys were used, but the Exuma keys were also used. So there's a very important document in Bahamian history. I'm sure you're familiar with the report on the Bahama Islands by William Wiley.
Yeah.
And there are some very important snippets in there that are often missed. One of them was when he was doing the census in 1789. And he said that it was impossible to accurately count the amount of blacks in the Bahamas because currently there are many who are living in what they call their Negro Town, which is now what we call Bain and Grandstown, going straight down to Cotabato, which is now Big Pond, right? You know, going straight into what is now Wolf Road and all those areas, right? And so when you look at how the Saltwater Underground Railroad operated, it's kind of right there in the name, right? And this Negro Town existed before they decided to name it after the governor and the merchant, right?
Okay.
Charles Bain and Lewis Grant,
Okay.
right? And so what we're talking about here is actually something that's often not applied to Bahamian history, which is called maroonage. You understand? And so when William Wiley also went on to say that, and there are upwards of 350 to 400 African American Negroes, either free or pretending to be free, hovering about the Exuma Keys.
African American Negroes.
That's what the Jamaicans call maritime maroonage right there. And they come, they find one, say, man, they right there on Mushakee, or they right there by Black Point. They go and get the troops together to come get the 50 or 60 you there. By the time they reach in the morning, everybody gone. And this was something that was assisted by local Bahamians. I have a big project that I'm working on called the Martyrs of Liberation. I can give you a little snippet of that. And these are talking about Bahamians that have lost their lives in the struggle for freedom. And one of those Bahamians was a man by the name of Emmanuel Kemp, who was here pre-Loyalist, before the Loyalists, or probably arrived very early on. But he was owned by the Kemps, right? Kemp Road, all of that stuff. And he operated from the creek. And he was actually executed for stealing a boat. And at the surface, it seems like, wow, this man was just executed for just stealing a boat. And then when I noticed what happened to him, after he was executed, his body was hung on the eastern side of Hog Island, which is now Paradise Island, right? Where that nice fancy golf course is. They hang Emmanuel Kemp's body there until it rotted off the chains. And 1 week later, they caught another fellow who stole a boat and hung him right next to Emmanuel's body. So these are men who have lost their lives in the struggle for freedom. But why did they decide to kill him and hang his body there? To serve as a warning to all of y'all other enslaved people who thinking about going to the Exuma Keys. And after 1791, when Emmanuel was executed, that's when you notice that this Exuma Keys maritime maroonish community started to dissipate, most of whom were just absorbed into the plantations in and around the Bahamas. But I would like to think and assume that some of them got away.
And that's how the Roll family get some of that free land in the Keys. Not the ones, the plantation. They get some private islands there. Let's go to the callers and we continue as I march towards the dates. Go ahead, caller. Guiding Radio AM, you live. Call you live. Hello, go ahead.
Hello.
You're live. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Newry. Good morning, Mr. Davis.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Chris, I listened to some intricacies. I want you to clear up something that was disturbing to me as far as his historical record. So, I'm familiar with what you're talking about, but this shouldn't be a surprise to me given the fact that the Native American Indians had given account of trading with Africans hundreds of years before Christopher Columbus arrived, right?
Yeah.
Now, I want you to clear this up for me. So, in documents I've read decades ago, a while back, it relates to the Seminole Wars. And so, just clear this up for me. The history is written by the winner.
Right.
The sinner. So what I'm saying is, I was saying that they wrote that Indians had African slaves, but then I'm juxtaposing what you're saying as relates to free African slaves running down to Florida, joining the Seminoles, miscegenating with them, et cetera, living a feudal society. But in the records, they just said that the chieftain noticed them because of their farming capabilities.
Right.
So could this be the reason that they say that the Indians owned slaves, because it was actually a feudal system?
No.
And most slaves already knew that they could live safely with the Indian chiefs as word spread by way of mouth. Now, we know that in history it is said that the Seminoles are one of the undefeated tribes in America. So we know about the Indian Wars, which ran on for about almost 50 years. And so let's give an example of how Europeans pit one another against one another. the Indians had sense, so they don't want us to notice. The Indians actually was fighting for their sovereignty and their national rights against the United States. So they sided with the Spanish and the British.
Exactly.
So they would attack the Americans and lodge into the swamp.
Right. Exactly.
Hence they were undefeated. Why are they not teaching us that? I'll hang up and listen. Another question, Chris. Have you ever heard about a very famous African lady named Ida B. Wells?
Yes, of course.
Who documented the lynchings in the South.
Right, yeah.
You should do a documentary on that. Let's open our mouth. Give thanks.
Yeah, right. Boy, that Wells name, I wonder if that's somehow connected to the bombers. But anyway, but yeah, you're right. I would say that overall, the relationship between indigenous Americans and Africans was not one where indigenous Americans owned them as enslaved people. Remember now, when we talk about this huge fallacy of race, though it's a fallacy, it's something that has great impact on our lives and our livelihood. So though it's a fallacy based in no biology, it's a real thing. And it was literally just a color line for the Americans, or the people that became the Americans. They had the terminology called the 5 civilized tribes. And these were Cherokee being the most famous one. And then we also have Cherokee Sound right there. So even enough of these people that we call Conky Joes around here were people who were European mixed with indigenous Americans. Many of those people were Europeans mixed with indigenous Americans.
And the Weatherfords.
Right, exactly.
They have Cherokee blood.
Exactly.
And
That's
white
where Cherokee, exactly.
They
So
white
you
now.
had indigenous Americans who were given a pass. Now, I'm not saying, one thing I don't like to do is call people sellouts and stuff like that. So, and it would be easy to say that, but we have to be careful in doing that. You have to remember, as you even mentioned yourself, 52, the gravity of these things these people was facing, man. These people was facing genocide. Those of us who have family and children, especially who have a daughter or a son, and you know this man coming in here to kill you, enslave your wife, and rape your daughter. I mean, come on, like, you will do anything. You will betray your best friend to ensure that don't happen, so we need to stop this thing. But it is true that some indigenous groups did that, but those were the ones who were often mixed in with indigenous Americans. And then they did something similar that they did in Africa as well. And it's interesting that in Africa, heavy blame is placed on Africans, right, in that scenario. But when they talk about Asia, when they talk about the Americas, South America, they don't paint the same brush where they blame indigenous Americans for their own genocide. But Africans, of course, is get blamed for their own. And so when you look at this, it's a quite complex thing. And you have this terminology that's used today called the $5 Indian. And it's all about race, and these people will use their 2% of indigenous American blood, even though they are phenotypically white. And it's actually quite disgusting, actually. They call indigenous Americans, call them the $5 Indian. And me, myself, some of these $5 Indians, I'm more indigenous American than they are, because they can only claim that they have Cherokee, but I could show you my ancestry. So I actually descended from the Wari, my mother's from Trinidad. And if you look at my mother, you can see, yeah, she is a woman of African descent, but she mixed with all type of things, right? And my lineage actually comes from Bajan, Kalinago, the people they always call Carib or Kalina, the indigenous Bajan, through my grandfather, Richard Austin, who is my mother's father. And I get pictures of them to show you. And then on my my mother's mother was almost a full-blooded Wararoo, indigenous American from Venezuela. And I get pictures of these people. You see? And I would actually argue that Africans, despite me being so dark, are far more indigenous Americans, or let's say black people, using the modern racial term, are far more intertwined and immersed with indigenous Americans than whites are. And that was done through survival, that was done through running away, that was done through different amalgamations. And the DNA testing that I'm sure that people have been hearing, but it's been going on for the past year, of which I'm intricately involved, including myself as an example, is showing that we have indigenous American blood, even in the darkest of us, like myself.
I don't have no indigenous blood.
Yeah, you did yours?
Of course.
Oh, okay.
They say I'm 96% black. Igbo. 96%. And they said I have 3% Irish. I don't know where that come from.
But you have Irish too?
You look Irish.
Any Irish
You're
people
black.
speak at your family union?
None.
None, man.
Let's go to this caller. It's going to be the last caller. We have 2 days of this, so I'm glad that I could extend this. Guardian Radio AM, you live caller.
Hello, Mr. Newry. How you doing?
Go ahead. I can let you speak. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead. You live. Hello? Okay. It's now at the end of the show. First of all, I'd like to thank historian Chris Davis for consenting to join me as we march towards our Bahamian independence. We are sharing the stories on how we connect to the United States and how their history is intricately connected to our history, and our history is intricately connected to their history. Because we already reached Coconut Grove yet.
Right.
So we haven't reached Coconut Grove yet. We haven't reached the Florida Keys yet.
The Garvey movement.
The Garvey movement yet. So we're finishing up the Salt Water Underground Railroad, our impact with that, and we'll move on from that, going on to the early 1900s, where we had white Bahamians who had to write back and get an affidavit to prove that they're white, right? And asking permission from the magistrate to say, hey, I need someone to write a note and swear that I'm a white person, and then come back and be white. Because, whatever it is. We're talking about Bahamian history. We're talking about Bahamian independence. We're talking about American independence. We're talking about our connectivity. This has been Guardian Radio AM with C.A. Newry. You have a wonderful day. Thank you very much, Chris.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, streaming on GuardianTalkRadio.com and the Guardian Radio app, Nassau, Bahamas.